Hello everyone and welcome to the Middle East Teaching and Learning Conference. My name is Mark Ryan. It's a pleasure to be here. To begin, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then we're going to get into the power of telling your personal education journey, or just your personal journey to students, colleagues, and the importance of knowing it yourself. So, like I said, my name is Mark Ryan. I'm a Canadian educator, and I graduated in 2005 from Queen's University, which is in a small town in Ontario, Kingston, and that's where my whole education journey formally kind of launched off as a teacher. But before that, I was working for many, many years in the Boys and Girls Club in Ottawa, in Canada, working with underprivileged youth, supporting them as a mentor and working in leadership roles, mostly related to the aquatics. Now, I want to get into all of this stuff that kind of make up my personal journey, and it's, I don't really need to do a giant intro about myself because the whole topic that I'm sharing today is about my personal journey, and I'll share different parts about what I learned about myself and about what's important to share in order to know yourself as an educator, to succeed and get to the goals that you want to get to, and also to empower your students and to empower your colleagues to be more willing to share their journeys. And it kind of begins with the understanding that it doesn't need to be a big, huge moment in your life to be a very powerful story. And I say that because one of the most powerful stories that I tell my students, I like to refer to it as the peanut butter and jam story. So in 2005, before I left Canada and moved to Hong Kong to start international teaching, I took a 2-month job planting trees. I had no experience planting trees. I had no experience camping. I had no business being in that environment, but for some reason, I got word of this opportunity and I decided to take it. And you might think, okay, this is going to be a story about risk-taking or resilience or something that I learned in this really difficult job of planting trees, which it is. It's a really, really difficult job. However, that's not the story at all. The story was, or is, every morning we would wake up at 6 a.m. before we got onto our buses at 6:30, and we were able to make our lunch for the day. And there was 2 tubs. They're huge. They're garbage can bins. One was filled with peanut butter, one was filled with strawberry jam, and then just a bunch of bread. That was your choice. You had bread, peanut butter sandwiches, jelly sandwiches, or the combination of the 2. And every day, I would make myself 2 peanut butter sandwiches. Why? Because I knew for a fact that I did not like peanut butter and jelly. Now, I don't remember why I know this. I don't actually remember ever eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or a peanut butter and jam sandwich, however you like to call it. But I knew I didn't like it. And for 24 years, I knew I didn't like it. So for the first month, maybe a little bit more, every day I would make 2 peanut butter sandwiches, and having the same food linked with hours and hours and hours of doing the same thing gets a little bit tiresome. So around week 5 or week 6, I decided to make a change. I decided on that day I would add jam to my peanut butter sandwich. So I did. I wrapped it up and I went on my business with planting trees. 4 hours later or so, I took a break, opened up the wrapping, took that sandwich out, which I knew was going to be disgusting. Took a bite. In that moment, I realized that I had wasted 24 years of my life. Peanut butter and jam far, far exceeded just a peanut butter sandwich. I was changed. I couldn't believe it. I had been locked into this mindset that something was wrong, and I firmly believed it. But actually, I never really questioned why. Even when I wondered if I ever even tasted a peanut butter and jam sandwich before when I was a kid, I didn't hold on to that thought for very long. So I often tell that to my students, to be careful with the things that they push away, because oftentimes those are for reasons that maybe just are not valid. and that they need to give things another chance because number one, your taste buds may change over time, but also just the way we're looking at things can change. So that's a very small story of an experience I had, but it makes a lot of conversation with the students in my classroom whenever I tell it. And during the year, whenever there's something that happens where they say, oh, you know, I didn't think I liked painting with acrylics. I'm an art teacher. They would maybe link to that peanut butter and jam sandwich, the story that I told earlier on. Now, in the write-up, it talks about impact and it talks about where. And impact is kind of the telling your story and allowing others to succeed or learn from it, or yourself to learn from it. And I think before you can do any of that kind of stuff, you need to figure out what are the stories that you want to tell. And I think as educators, people find it really difficult to talk about themselves, especially to their colleagues or to their peers, because they don't want to come across as bragging about things, which is fair enough. However, your stories are very, very important. Your stories are what brought you to where you are today. And people need to hear how you got there. They need to hear the successes and the failures, but they don't need to hear everything. Because if they hear too much, then it does come off maybe just as a bragging type of mentality. So my suggestion, and what's worked well for me, and I'll show you the reasons for that in this talk, are to think of an R word when looking back. And it's not reflect, it's reminisce. What are the moments in your life that you constantly think back to and you reminisce about? They were very, very successful, very, very impactful. Maybe there was a lot of struggle. Maybe there was a lot of failure with that. But there was something that allowed you to go back and look at it again and again and again. These, I suggest, are the most important things to begin with. So when I like to think about what I reminisce about as an international educator, it starts in 2005. It starts at a job fair in Kingston, Ontario. A young kid who had only ever spent a few months in a classroom learning about teaching. And the opportunity came to go travel abroad and start my education journey. Now, during this time, I signed up for a teaching fair, open to go to anywhere in the world. Had two opportunities, Hong Kong and Dubai. I had never been to either of these places, and I couldn't tell you what the pros and the cons were really about either one. I just knew that I was ready to go, and these were the two opportunities on the table. So after the teaching fair day one, I have my offers on the table. I give a call to my father and I say, okay, I have Hong Kong and I have Dubai, both classroom teacher opportunities. And he said something to me that, wasn't profound, but something I won't forget. If you go to Hong Kong, you will clearly be embraced and surrounded by different views, different values, and a lot of different cultural opportunities. And the same can be said for Dubai, but in 2005, it wasn't going to be exactly the same. There was a lot more restrictions and a lot more, you could say, a compound living element to what was going to be happening. So as a young educator, I was encouraged by my father to go and take the Hong Kong opportunity. And I linked that to being open-minded when I talk to my students about growing up in Canada, which is a very multicultural environment. However, my views, my values, they were all surrounded by very, very similar people as I grew up. I didn't diverge and go and see a bunch of different opportunities all the time. I had exposure to things, but it wasn't going to be like living in Hong Kong. But I was open-minded and I was accepting of that opportunity. So I took that chance in 2005 at the job fair, signed the contract for Hong Kong, got on an airplane, and began my education journey. And my educational journey in Hong Kong lasted for 10 years. So it was definitely the right move for me in that sense. I then think back to something else that's very important in my life, besides starting that important international education journey, and that's athletics, running. I'm a runner. I ran in college, and in 2009, I had the opportunity to run quite a large race in Hong Kong called the Standard Chartered 10K, Standard Chartered Marathon. They have these similar Standard Chartered races around the world. There's actually one in Dubai. And in Hong Kong, around 40,000 people entered the 10K event. It's a very popular event. A 10K, as you may know, is achievable with a certain amount of training. A marathon takes a little bit more of a commitment, at least to finish strong. And in 2009, I decided to take on this challenge. And I had told someone before I entered that race that actually my personal best time for the 10K was faster than the Hong Kong record at that time. So I was looking to do quite well. And I wasn't expecting it, but that message started to travel. It was reported in the newspaper, and people started talking about it online, and people spoke about it on the radio. So when I showed up to that start line in 2009, there was actually some pressure I felt to do well in that event. Now, having some experience in running and in big races in Canada, it didn't really get to me that much. And I think that goes a little bit to this idea of telling your personal journey, is the more that you do something, the more opportunity you give yourself to face these pressures and these challenges, the less they impact you when you're called upon to do them. Speak in front of your colleagues on stage or speak in front of a classroom, whatever. So it didn't really get to me that much. I ran my race in 2009, I was successful. And actually I won the Standard Chartered 10K in 2009 and then again in 2011. And when I talk to the students about this, I talk to them about finding that balance, about being a balanced individual when it comes to your life. And for me as an educator, I find running a huge part to keep that balance. When I go out for a run, my training runs, it's a very emotional time. It's a time when I can think and process my thoughts. It's a time when I can reflect on the day's events. And it allows you to pull some of those things in your life, just like I said about public speaking and overcoming the fear or the worry that you're not going to meet other people's expectations when you're talking to them. You can apply those things into different areas. For example, the start line to a race. And the third story that I often reminisce about is when I left education in 2010. Not completely, but I did leave it, and it all happened by chance. And I tell this story because I think it fits the biggest characteristic, the biggest learner profile of who I am, and it's a risk taker. In 2010, I was painting a mural in Hong Kong, side of a wall in one of the very busy tourist districts called Lan Kwai Fong. Walking past, that I was not aware at the time, was the CEO of the biggest television station in Hong Kong, Stephen Chan. And I had my wall on the mural as the person who had done it. And he recognized the name from the marathon that I had won, had some exposure from that afterwards, doing some interviews and such. And he found a way to contact me so that we could have a discussion about a possible opportunity. So we met for lunch in 2010, I would say January or February of 2010. And before the lunch, I decided that I would go there with an intent to do something. I would go prepared to this meeting. And so I went to this meeting and I discussed the opportunity of possibly being an English language or an educator for the actors on television if they needed to understand their lines better, if they're doing something in English that they weren't quite sure about. I could kind of be a coach or a mentor. He liked the idea, but then he said he had a different one. He said he saw me as a children's presenter, performer, entertainer, and wanted to know if I would like to have my own kids' show. So without really thinking too much, I thought that would be an interesting opportunity. He got on his phone right then, called up the head of the children's department, said, I'm here with Mark Ryan, he's interested in the opportunity, and we're gonna try to develop something. So let's get going on that. 2 months later, there was a set built. I'd written the first 3 or 4 episodes of the show, and I was going to begin to star in this kids' show in Hong Kong. I had no television experience, no acting experience, except for standing in front of a classroom every day, which does give you some presentation ability. But I wasn't fazed by it too much. I knew it was an excellent opportunity. I was willing to try it. I was open-minded to it. I knew that it would be part of balancing who I was as an individual. And I knew I needed to take that risk. So I showed up 2 months later. We filmed our first episode, and it ran for almost 5 years. We shot nearly 400 episodes of that TV show. And on a daily basis, it reached almost 1 million people in mainland China and in Hong Kong. And I reminisce about it and I tell my students about it, not just because it is something really unique to speak about having a television show, but it talks about taking that chance, taking that risk when maybe others would say, you don't have the background for it. That's not going to work. There's a great chance that the entire thing is going to fail, which is all true, but the risk and far outweighs the fact that it might fail. And even if it fails, we all know that failure often leads to greater success, and that all of our successes are from our previous failures and learning from them. So what I would like you to think about is, what are the 3 things that you reminisce about? What are the moments that you can connect to a learner profile, for example, if you're working in an IB school system, or just a good personal trait when it comes to something like competency or intelligence or open-mindedness or being balanced or principled or whatever it is. If you look back on the things that you have done and the things that you really think about very strongly, you often reminisce about them. Do they have common links? And from my experience, once you have picked those moments in time and you've picked the trait that matches them, you'll start to see how that has unfolded a lot more in your life. So when you're talking to your students, you'll be able to talk about more things that relate to being a risk taker for myself, or being open-minded, or being balanced. And there's another thing. Students need to hear your stories because they need to share theirs. Student voice is a huge part. Social emotional education is a huge part of what we're doing. Teachers are encouraged every day to do responsive classroom, to allow students to share with each other and learn from each other. And the best way they can do that is seeing a role model in the classroom doing just that, sharing their journey, sharing how they got to where they are today, behind that desk, being that educator that is so impactful in the students' lives. And another thing, not just the students, because the students are quite easy to take on that personal journey story, to listen. They love listening to the stories of their teachers. And the more they hear it, the better you get at it, and the better they get at storytelling, because they have someone to model from. And the other side of that coin are your colleagues. Far too often, we have amazing colleagues working in our school systems that are willing to share stories and share experiences with students in what they feel is a safe environment, but they're not willing to step out of that bubble and share those experiences with their colleagues. And I think if teachers can find the stories that they really feel linked to who they are and how they got to where they are, people can get to know each other in their schools, begin to better understand who is there to support them, who has strengths in certain areas and weaknesses in others. And it allows opportunity for you as an educator to grow. If people see that you are a balanced person and you're into, let's say, Taekwondo, then, once someone knows that, opportunities seem to unfold themselves in front where it's say, oh, I know someone who would do really well with this opportunity to support students or to support colleagues, whatever, with Taekwondo because I heard his story. So, my challenge for you that you can take away from this talk, I hope, is that your personal journey is really, really important. Number one, you need to understand it yourself. So think about the things that you reminisce about, 2 or 3 of them. Link them to the personal traits of who you are so that you know how you can communicate that story and also pass on a message about what it is that the student is trying to learn or the person is trying to get from it. And then take those stories, pass them on to your students, pass them on to your colleagues. Do that so much that you become so good at talking and presenting that you could do it in front of 30 students, 14 students, as the classes may be here in the future, or 1 million students on a daily basis. It's been a pleasure to be part of the Middle East Teaching and Learning Conference. My name is Mark Ryan. Thank you for taking this time to listen to me, and I hope you pass on your personal journey to those around you because it's so, so important. Thank you very much. Have a great day and talk to you soon. See you.